In this lesson, I want to dig a bit more into the routes object to see how flexible it can be. So we have our default route that we set up in the previous lesson, but now I want to show a specific item. Whatever it is we're working with, we're going to show it. So usually you would have some sort of ID, right? You'd have show/5, and then that would trigger the show method. But as you can imagine, if we view this in the browser and I load the show route, nope, that's not going to work. We would then have to do show/5 before that would hook in. It's not going to work with any other ID. If I remove this and we try show/40, of course that's not going to work. So now we need to specify that that should just be an ID. So let's replace the number with :ID, and now that's going to match anything. It's a wildcard. Reload the page, and now, no matter what number we choose, we are loading that route. So how can we gain access to what the ID is? Well, Backbone will automatically capture that and send it through to the method that you trigger. So if we call the show method, it will accept the ID as a parameter for ID of, and we'll add on ID. Reload the page, and now we have ID of 2 or 150, and now you can see we are capturing that. So then at this point, you have a couple options. You can either set up the page as you need to, so maybe whatever model you're working with, you would fetch the one from the database, and I'll show you how to use Backbone and Ajax shortly, but you would fetch the item from the database that has an ID of 150 or 2, and then you would set up your page. Or another option, which I would recommend, is to simply fire or trigger an event. So instead of doing all of this, we're going to set up a new model, we're going to set up a new view, we're going to append it to this. That is a lot of work to be doing in a router. Instead, I would recommend that you simply trigger an event. Hey, I'm showing an item, and I will send through the ID for whoever wants to accept this data and do something with it. But the router is not responsible for that. And if that's confusing, don't worry, we'll dig into that more in the next lesson. Let's continue on with some other ways that we can set up our routes, though. Now, what if we wanted to set up maybe just some long string? So maybe it's a download link, and we want to listen for download and then the ID, but then it could have a lot more after that. It could have something.pdf, those long download strings. How could we match that? Well, let's see. So this would maybe trigger the download method. I will duplicate that and change it to download accordingly, and log once again the ID. All right, so if I reload the page and now we're fetching download, well, as you can imagine, that's not going to trigger. It will only trigger if we request this exact param or setting. So download/5, and now you can see that it is working. But if we change the name of the file at all, nope, it's no longer working at all. So now we need to figure out, well, what if we just need an ID or something, but we don't really care what the rest of it is? Well, in that case, we want to take advantage of what's referred to as a splat. And if you're a Ruby or a Ruby on Rails developer, this should make perfect sense to you. And in fact, Backbone was actually stripped out of one Ruby on Rails project. So the creator, Josh, is familiar with both. So let's change this now. We're going to say the splat file name. Notice that I set a star and then the identifier. So let's try this. Now I'm going to reload the page and check it out. That is triggering. So we'll say my great ebook, and now it's working. Or in maybe this case, you wouldn't even have an ID. You would just have download / the name of the file. And that way that event will work for the ebook, but it'll also work for something else, maybe some kind of zip file that you're offering for download. So now take a look. We are going to capture that, and we'll call it file name. And now we will console.log file name. If I reload the page, now that's going to capture the entire thing. So if we do just that alone, we get migrate ebook. But then maybe if we have some kind of secret key or something like that, it's going to capture that as well. It will capture the .pdf. It'll grab all of that. And then we know how to proceed. So now we have the necessary means to hook into a specific URI, regardless of how long or unique it may be. So let's take a look at just a handful of others you might consider. Maybe somebody's going to hook into search. So you do search query, and that's going to trigger the search method. And then once again, you should know how to finish this up. We'll have a method called search, and it's going to accept the query. And then you would query the database where the search term is equal to what was stored as that segment, and then you would load the page or trigger custom events as needed. Finally, let's set up a default route when we don't recognize what the user is trying to access. So we would use a splat for that. Maybe splat other or default or unrecognized, any of those would work. So in that case, we will just trigger the default route. I'll place this at the bottom. I'll call it default. I want to capture what they tried to access. So we will refer to that as other. And then once again, I will alert, not sure what you need here. Obviously, you don't want to really throw up an alert for these things, but you can proceed accordingly. Maybe show a 404 page, anything like that, or redirect. You accessed, and let's tack on other. Okay, so let's try this. I reload the page. This did match, so we don't display it. But what if we change it up and we're just going to have lots of gibberish here? Well, now we are going to get an alert because that does not match any route that we've set up in our application, so we get the alert. However, if we did access, maybe we do have download/splat. So if we did begin that with download, well, then that would work. But if it was anything else that we don't have a route for, hide, we haven't set that up, well, in that case, we're going to get an alert. So that should get you started with these routes. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about triggering events rather than performing lots of logic within these router callback methods.